If your wife walked out of the house at 10 p.m., would you be concerned? I wouldn't be because all I have to do is switch on the local news to catch a glimpse of her. My wife, Alice Johnson, co-hosts the nightly news on a major TV station in Birmingham. She's not only smart, but also incredibly beautiful. And many believe her next step could be a significant market like Atlanta or Chicago. There's even talk about an offer from New York, the ultimate destination for news anchors. My name is James Carter, and Alice decided to keep her maiden name for her broadcasting career, a common choice among female announcers to separate their personal and professional lives. I feel incredibly proud and lucky to be her husband. We met during our college days at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. She was a broadcasting major, while I studied marketing. Our paths crossed at a freshman year fraternity party, and I was immediately captivated. Tall, blonde, and stunning, she was everything I wasn't, outgoing but neither an athlete nor model material. Despite this, we clicked and soon became a couple. Our relationship had its ups and downs, including a brief 2-week breakup. I missed her so much that I rushed to her dorm, only to find her running towards me. It felt like a scene straight out of a movie, and we vowed never to part again. By senior year, we were deeply in love, engaged, and living together off campus, though we waited until after graduation to tie the knot. She wanted a grand wedding, and her family had the means to provide it. We got married in the Canterbury Chapel a week after we graduated. Alice landed a weekend weather anchor job in Huntsville, which wasn't prestigious but a solid start. I secured a low-level position at a local ad agency to gain experience. Alice's career trajectory was swift. Within a year, she was offered a reporter position at the biggest station in Mobile. We moved to the Gulf Coast, where I found work at a large ad firm. Alice excelled, becoming a weekend newscaster and eventually a nightly news co-host. Her pregnancy announcement skyrocketed her popularity, and our daughter Karen's birth became a local sensation. The station even produced a documentary series on Alice's journey as a new mother returning to work, which won a regional Emmy. Her success led to a co-host position at Birmingham's top station, WSYY. Leaving Mobile for Birmingham was a strategic move, knowing it could open doors to even greater opportunities. Birmingham, with its 1.2 million population and significant media market, was a major advancement for Alice's career. I was hesitant about relocating to Birmingham after settling comfortably in Mobile, but my worries proved unfounded. Thanks to recommendations from friends in Mobile and support from the Birmingham station, I secured a great job at the city's second-largest advertising agency. The station's management went above and beyond, connecting us with an excellent real estate agent who found us a fantastic house in Hoover and a wonderful daycare for baby Karen. The transition was smoother than anticipated, and we quickly adapted to our new life. Our daily routine is quite different because being married to a television journalist is unique. I wake up early, make breakfast, and head to work, leaving Alice and Karen to sleep in. Alice gets up with Karen and spends the morning with her. After lunch, she takes Karen to Mrs. Morgan, a kind woman who cares for Karen and a few other children, preparing them for kindergarten. I pick Karen up after work, cook dinner, and bathe her before reading her a bedtime story. Then I unwind until Alice returns home, often waking me from the couch. Alice's job is demanding. She arrives at the station at 3 p.m. to prep for the evening news, goes on air at 6 p.m., and again at 10 p.m. Recently, her news director, Mike Ramirez, has been holding post-mortem meetings after the late newscast, keeping her even later. The competition for ratings is intense, with stations always striving to increase their audience share. As someone in advertising, I get the obsession with ratings, but as a husband, I miss having quality time with Alice. Our long work hours make us feel more like roommates than spouses. We try to spend weekends together, but it's tough, especially with Alice's growing number of public appearances. Our schedules rarely align, making it hard to talk about our situation, and Alice seems unwilling to discuss it, knowing there are no easy solutions. When we married, we anticipated these challenges, and I agreed to everything. Many of our friends face similar demands in their careers. I try to be supportive because I knew what I was getting into, and Alice's income significantly improves our lifestyle, though money isn't everything. Eventually, I couldn't hold back my frustration. One day at lunch, I opened up to Joe Miller, the media director at our agency. Joe, married with a daughter slightly older than Karen, had become my closest friend at work. As he talked about his happy family life, I blurted out, Damn, I wish I had what you have. Looks like trouble in paradise, buddy, Joe said. What's going on? I let it all out, surprised by how badly I felt. I'm married to one of the best women on TV, I groaned, but I see her as often as her fans do. Joe shook his head sympathetically. That's rough, James. Can't you take a vacation or a long weekend? Your folks would love to keep Karen. I've thought about it, I said, but Alice says Mike Ramirez is pushing them to keep ratings up. He's afraid their absence will cause a drop they can't recover from. Look, Joe replied, I know Mike Ramirez. He's ambitious but also decent. Maybe you should talk to him and see if he can help you and Alice get some time together. I don't know, Joe, I sighed. Alice would be furious if she found out I talked to her boss. She doesn't need to know, Joe said. Mike's coming to the agency tomorrow for a presentation. You can catch him afterward. I don't want to mix personal issues with work, I said. Mike'd be silly. It's just a preliminary meeting. This is a great chance to talk to him. That evening, Alice came home even later than usual. She didn't wake me from the couch where I had fallen asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, dragged myself to bed next to her, and thought, now I won't even get to kiss her goodnight. Determined to break this cycle, I kept an eye on the conference room the next day. As the meeting wrapped up, I waved at Mike. He was in high spirits. Hey, James, how's my favorite news anchor's husband? He called out. Hey, Mike, do you have a few minutes? I asked. Sure, what's on your mind? He responded cheerfully. I need you to give Alice a break. You're working her too hard, I said, frowning. He looked concerned. Did she complain? No, she enjoys it, I replied. I'm the one who's struggling. I don't get to see her anymore. He relaxed and joked. You knew she had a demanding job when you married her. True, I agreed. But all these appearances and post-show meetings are eating into our time together. Okay, he said. We've probably overdone it. I'll see if we can lighten her schedule. And don't worry about the postmortems. We haven't had one since the last ratings came out. Have you seen how much we're outranking the competition? Management is thrilled. I've got to get to my next meeting. Keep making your wife happy. With that, he patted my back and left. Back at my desk, I checked the ratings and saw the latest set was published a month ago. If Mike hadn't held a postmortem in a month, what was Alice doing when she came home so late? The thought sent a chill down my spine. Was she having an affair? I quickly dismissed it but couldn't shake the feeling. Alice loved me and wouldn't risk our marriage over something trivial. She could have been late for plenty of innocent reasons, maybe catching up on fan mail, or just needing some time to unwind. However, these thoughts didn't put my mind at ease. At that moment, Joe peeked into my office. Hey, I saw you talking to Mike. Did he give you any relief? He asked. I'm not sure, Joe. I guess I won't know until I talk to Alice, I replied, still deep in thought. Joe looked puzzled but didn't press for more details. All right, buddy. If you need anything, let me know, he said before leaving me alone with my thoughts. The rest of the day, I felt like a ghost, mechanically going through my tasks while my mind kept wandering. I couldn't stop thinking about what Mike had said and what Alice had told me about her late hours. Should I confront her? What if her explanation was perfectly innocent? Accusing her without solid proof could devastate our relationship. Yet ignoring the issue made me feel weak and helpless. By the time I left work to pick up Karen, I still hadn't found any answers. Thankfully, my 4-year-old's demands distracted me for the evening. She was unusually clingy, sensing my mood, and didn't want me to stop reading to her. When she finally drifted off to sleep, I felt tears welling up in my eyes, imagining how painful a divorce would be for her. Emotionally drained, I tried to watch TV but couldn't focus until the news came on. Seeing Alice on the screen reminded me of how much I loved her, and I tried to convince myself she wouldn't cheat. It was well past midnight when Alice finally walked in. Oh, I didn't realize you were still up, she said, surprised. I hugged her tightly. I just wanted to see you. You're awfully late tonight. She kissed me quickly and kicked off her shoes. Yeah, sorry. Mike held us up again with one of his post-show meetings, she said, heading to bed. As she walked upstairs, I realized she had lied. Mike had told me there hadn't been a postmortem meeting in a month. I didn't want to believe she was cheating, but I couldn't ignore the possibility either. The next day I asked Joe to have lunch with me. He sensed my seriousness and agreed. We drove to a restaurant far from the office in silence. After we ordered, I hesitated, then Joe broke the silence. It's Alice, isn't it? His words opened the floodgates, and I poured out my fears and insecurities. Joe listened quietly. Damn, I thought you and Alice had the perfect marriage, he said finally. Me too, I replied, feeling the weight of my words. So what are you going to do? He asked. His question made things clearer. Joe, I need to go to the station and see for myself. If I'm wrong and it's all innocent, I'll sneak out without her knowing. And if you're right? Joe asked softly. I don't know, but at least I'll know the truth. This uncertainty is killing me. What about Karen? He asked. I've already thought of that, I told Joe. When we get back, I'll call Mrs. Morgan and ask if she can keep Karen late tonight. She's offered before, so it should be fine. We finished lunch and returned to the office. Though still distraught, having a plan gave me some relief. Even those facing execution feel a certain calm when the day finally arrives. Mrs. Morgan agreed, but asked me to return by 11 p.m. I have work in the morning, she said. It wasn't much time, but it was the best I could get, so I promised. After work, I informed Karen of the change. She cried at first but brightened when Mrs. Morgan mentioned a pizza party. I paid for the extra time in pizza, then left before Karen could get upset again. I went home, made dinner but couldn't eat. Cleaning up, I tried to distract myself, but doubts crept in. The news wouldn't end until 10:30 p.m. What if Alice came straight home? What would I say? These fears paralyzed me until I remembered my resolve at lunch. I had to do something. By 10 p.m., I decided to go to the station. There wouldn't be many people there. An engineer, 2 cameramen, and a sound technician. Hopefully, I could slip in unnoticed. When I arrived, I realized my mistake. Joe, the night watchman, was there. He knew me, so getting in wasn't an issue, but I had to sign in. So much for stealth. Good evening, Mr. Carter, Joe said. Here to watch the news? Yeah, I replied, signing the log. Joe looked at me sympathetically. There won't be a problem, will there? No, of course not, I replied quickly, heading towards the studio. What did he mean? Did he know something? I peeked through the blackout curtains. The news had just ended, and Alice was heading towards the green room instead of her dressing room. The green room was usually reserved for guests, not for the 10 p.m. news. As Alice opened the door, a lamp inside revealed a male figure. The door closed behind them, and I was left outside, heart pounding. I could burst in, but if it was innocent, Alice would never forgive me. If I stayed outside, I'd never know. I remembered a small observation window Alice had shown me. I headed there, checking the time. It was already 10:45. I needed to leave soon to pick up Karen. I peered through the window and saw Alice in a passionate embrace with a man. I recorded a video with my phone, capturing the light that made her black lingerie stand out against her skin. I wanted to confront them, but seeing the time, I had to pick up Karen. I ran to the lobby, nodded to Joe, and hurried out the door. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, Joe said. Damn, I thought. Does everyone but me know what's going on? I jumped into the car and sped to Mrs. Morgan's house. She let me in, and I found Karen asleep. Wrapping her in a blanket, I picked her up and thanked Mrs. Morgan for keeping her. She looked at me oddly and asked, Are you all right, Mr. Carter? Only then did I realize I had tears streaming down my cheeks. Oh, it's nothing. Just got something in my eye, I said. I thanked her again, carried Karen to the car, and drove home. Karen stayed asleep as I carried her upstairs and put her to bed. She looked so sweet and innocent, and I longed for the innocence I had lost tonight. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat in the dark, waiting. The silence was deafening, and a memory of my grandmother's passing flashed through my mind, deepening my sadness. When Alice got home around 1 a.m., she turned on the kitchen light and saw me sitting there. James, what are you doing? She asked, surprised. I've been waiting for you, I replied evenly. The security guard said you came by the studio. Is everything okay with Karen? Where is she? Alice asked, her voice tinged with concern. Mrs. Morgan kept her for me. She's asleep upstairs, I answered. Well, if you came to the studio, why didn't you stop by my office? She asked, confused. I steadied myself. This was it. I saw you tonight. I saw you go into the green room with Bob Anderson, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Oh, we just had a meeting after the news, she replied nonchalantly. Alice, I looked through the observation window. I saw what your meeting was about. I even saw your new lingerie, I stated, watching as she looked embarrassed. Oh, James, I'm so sorry, she said softly. Are you sorry you did it or just sorry you got caught? I demanded, my frustration growing. I'm sorry you found out this way, she said quietly, avoiding my gaze. You're leaving me for him, aren't you? I asked, feeling a lump form in my throat. She dropped to her knees and took my hands. No, honey, I'm not leaving you. This is just a fling. Maybe it'll be over soon, and things will go back to normal, she said, her words shocking me. You're not going to stop. You're going to keep cheating on me? I asked in disbelief. It doesn't mean anything. Just let me have my fun and I'll come back to you, she said, her tone dismissive. I can't believe this. You expect me to agree to be a betrayed man? I couldn't hold back my fury any longer. How can you do this to me? I shouted, my voice shaking with anger. Alice stood up, her eyes icy and detached. James, your opinion doesn't matter, she said flatly. I'm your husband. If you don't stop this, I'll file for divorce, I threatened, hoping she would understand how serious I was. Her expression didn't waver. That's not in your best interest, James. You'll lose custody of Karen and most of our assets. The court won't care about the affair. They'll focus on Karen's well-being, and I'll get custody. You'll only see her on weekends and holidays, she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. But you're the one cheating, I protested, feeling the situation spiral out of control. This is a no-fault state, James. The court doesn't care about infidelity. Ask any lawyer if you don't believe me, she said, her tone final and unyielding. I don't want this to happen, James. I want our family to stay together. This fling is irrelevant to us. Just think it over, she said, planting a kiss on my forehead before heading to bed. I sat there, overwhelmed by a mix of anger, loss, sadness, and confusion. The idea that Alice would cheat on me was unimaginable, and her suggestion to continue the affair was beyond comprehension. Eventually, I dragged myself to bed, falling asleep almost instantly from sheer exhaustion. Despite my fatigue, I woke up at 6 o'clock the next morning. I showered, shaved, and dressed robotically, my mind racing with wild thoughts, running away, shaking Alice awake, taking Karen and disappearing, or simply never getting out of bed again. But when I looked at Karen, peacefully sleeping, I knew I had to stay strong for her. Doing something reckless would only result in losing her. I had to put her first. So, I completed my morning routine and headed to the office, working on autopilot. James, Joe said, are you okay? When I didn't respond, he came in and closed the door. What's wrong? He asked. I told him everything about the previous night. Joe listened, stunned by Alice's attitude. This is insane, he said. She expects you to tolerate her cheating? He looked me square in the eye. Alice has changed. You can't rely on her anymore. You need to look out for yourself. The first step is consulting an attorney. You need to know your rights. I don't know any lawyers in Birmingham, I replied, feeling utterly defeated. I can help with that, Joe said with a reassuring smile. My college roommate is a lawyer here. I'll call him. A few minutes later, he returned with a piece of paper. You have an appointment at 1 p.m. today. Here's his name and address. Thanks, Joe. At least this gives me something to do, I said, grateful for his support. No problem. After your meeting, come back and tell me what he said, he instructed. The meeting with the lawyer was disheartening. He listened patiently as I recounted my situation, then explained, in a no-fault state, the court isn't interested in who did what. They focus on property division and child welfare. What does that mean for me? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. It means Alice will likely get custody unless she is deemed unfit. You'll have visitation rights, but Karen will live with her. You'll also be required to pay child support, even though Alice earns more, he said bluntly. And the house? I asked, clinging to any hope. It's considered joint property, but the court prefers children to remain in their home. Alice will probably keep it until Karen turns 18. After that, you can sell it and divide the equity, he explained. But what if she moves to another market? I objected. In that case, you can sell the house. Until then, it stays, he clarified. I shook my head, feeling utterly defeated. Damn it, she knew exactly what she was doing. I'm screwed, I muttered. I'm sorry, he said, as we shook hands. It's not always fair, but that's the law. Driving back, I felt like I was being punished for something I didn't do. Joe saw my face and knew the outcome. Damn it, Joe, I said. It's just not fair. She's put me in this impossible situation, and there's nothing I can do about it. I have to put up with it to keep my daughter and my home. I paced around the office, frustration boiling over. Now I understand why some men lose it. Mike could even joke about that, James, Joe said quickly. I know you're angry, but if anything happens to her, I don't want to be the one testifying that you made threats. Okay, I get it, I agreed, calming down a bit. I wouldn't do anything like that. It just feels like she's an anchor dragging me down. I glanced out the window and groaned. A new billboard showed Alice and Bob Anderson with the caption, Birmingham's choice for the 6 o'clock news. See? I said to Joe, pointing at it. I can't escape her, even here. Joe looked at the sign, then turned back to me with a new idea. How desperate are you to get out of this mess? He asked. Not desperate enough for violence, I said firmly. No, nothing like that, but I have an idea, he said. We talked for an hour, with me repeatedly saying it was crazy and wouldn't work. Joe kept pushing. How much worse could it get? Eventually, I realized I had nothing to lose. Okay, Joe, I'm in, I said finally. I left the office feeling both determined and filled with doubt. Could I risk losing my daughter for this plan? Maybe it was better to endure the humiliation. As I picked up Karen and made dinner, I kept thinking. I couldn't bear to watch Alice and Bob on the news, so I turned off the TV. To my surprise, Alice came home early. She put Karen to bed, and I heard them laughing and reading stories together. It felt like old times. When Alice came downstairs, I thanked her. She misses you, especially at bedtime. I know, she said softly, and I miss her too. I wondered if she was reconsidering her choices, but my hopes were quickly dashed. I'm taking a vacation next week, she said. Mike Ramirez suggested it since our ratings are so high. I'll check with my boss tomorrow to join you, I said, trying to sound positive. No, James. Bob and I are going away alone. We're tired of sneaking around and want to enjoy each other without any worries. I was stunned. She continued, Mrs. Morgan will keep Karen all week. You just need to drop her off and pick her up. Here's where I'll be if you need to contact me. She handed me a piece of paper. We'll be back on Sunday, and things will go back to normal. She kissed me on the head like a child and said, Thanks for taking care of everything, honey, then went to bed. Oh my God, I thought. This is the most humiliating experience of my life. I was shaking with rage and knew I had to regain my dignity. Joe's crazy plan seemed like my best option. I left work early on Friday to see Alice before she left with Bob Anderson. I arranged for Mrs. Morgan to keep Karen overnight, ensuring she wouldn't witness any arguments. I checked Alice's closet and saw her suitcases, so I knew she'd come home to pack. When her car pulled in, I waited in the living room. What are you doing here? She asked. Is Karen okay? She's fine, I said. She's at Mrs. Morgan's. Then why are you here? I wanted to convince you not to go away with Bob this week, I told her. She put her hands on her hips. I've told you, I'm having my affair with Bob. When we get back, it will be over and everything will go back to normal. You just have to be patient. But what about our wedding vows? I pleaded. What about leaving everyone else behind? Those vows were from another time. No one believes that nonsense anymore, Alice said, irritated. But this is infidelity. I don't want you to dishonor our marriage, I insisted. James, if I want to be with Bob, I will. This has nothing to do with you and me, she replied dismissively. But what about your fans? They won't approve, I argued. I don't care what they think. In a year, I'll leave this town for a real city. What people here think means nothing to me. Now stop pestering me. I have to pack or I'll be late. If you can't stand seeing me with Bob, leave now, she said coldly. I stood up, feeling utterly defeated, my shoulders sagging. I'm sorry, Alice, for everything, I mumbled before walking out the door. The weight of the situation crushed me as I drove aimlessly, eventually stopping at the local tavern. I needed to numb the pain, to drown my sorrows. As I drained my second beer, Joe walked in and spotted me. Hey, buddy, he greeted me with concern. How did it go? It didn't go well, I replied, feeling the despair settle in. You'll have to see it for yourself. Joe gave me a determined look. Not until I try what you did. We finished our beers in silence, then drove back to my house. Alice was already gone. Joe wasted no time, setting up my computer and bringing up the hidden camera footage with a few quick keystrokes. We watched together as Alice dismissed my pleas and elaborated on her plans with Bob. What a heartless person, Joe muttered, shaking his head. Then, when he saw her disregard for her fans and her plans to leave town, his expression changed. We got her, This is even better than I hoped. He saved the recordings to a flash drive and made a backup copy. Here's the backup, he said, holding up the drive triumphantly. We headed back to the tavern to retrieve Joe's car, and he insisted I follow him home for dinner. Edie made a big meal. If you don't show up, she'll be upset, he urged. Reluctantly, I followed him. When we arrived, Edie greeted me warmly, hugging me and kissing my cheek. Whether it was out of friendship or pity, I appreciated the gesture. The dinner passed in a blur, my mind preoccupied while Joe and Edie exchanged concerned glances. Afterward, they led me to the den where Joe opened a bottle of wine. We drank in silence until Edie finally spoke up. I'm so angry and disappointed in Alice. I don't even know what to say. She always seemed so sweet and loving. When did she turn into such a selfish, promiscuous woman? Edie exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. Success has changed her. Now she thinks she can do anything, Joe replied. Edie turned to him sharply. Do whatever you can to help James. I usually avoid taking sides in divorces, but this is different. Alice is out of line, and we need to help James keep his daughter. She then looked directly at Joe. And if you ever get tempted by one of those models or TV personalities, I'll come after you with a butcher knife. Joe and I laughed, though I wasn't entirely sure she was joking. We talked and drank late into the night until I collapsed on their couch. I vaguely remember Edie covering me with a blanket and patting my arm comfortingly. The next thing I knew, morning light was streaming through the window, and I had a terrible taste in my mouth. Joe lent me a toothbrush and razor, and I did my best to make myself presentable. Edie had prepared a hearty breakfast, and I joined them at the table, my appetite slightly better, possibly due to my survival instincts kicking in. After breakfast, Joe took my hand. Leave everything to me. I've got a lot to do this weekend. Just pick up Karen and get out of here. I'll keep you posted, he said reassuringly. Joe, I don't know what I'd do without you, I said sincerely. I hugged him awkwardly and headed home, knowing I had one more difficult task ahead. I found Bob and Betty Anderson's number in our address book and made the call. Betty answered, her voice tinged with curiosity. Hi, Betty. This is James Carter, Alice's husband. Can I come over to talk? Hi, James. Yes, come on over, she replied, sounding hesitant, probably wondering why I wanted to see her. As I drove to her house, I rehearsed what to say. Telling someone their spouse is cheating is never easy, and it was even more awkward since I didn't know Betty well. But she had a right to know. Betty had attended the University of Alabama with Alice and me. She was in Alice's sorority but 2 years younger, so we didn't interact much. I was surprised she had married Bob. She never seemed like his type. When I arrived, Betty greeted me and offered me a drink. Just water with ice, please, I said, my mouth dry with anxiety. Once she brought it, I took a sip and began. Betty, do you know where Bob is? I asked gently. Of course, she said. He's at a TV convention all week. Why do you ask? Concern crept into her voice. Betty, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but Bob isn't at a convention. He's with my wife having an affair at the coast, I revealed as gently as I could. Betty looked stunned, as if I had slapped her. That can't be, she protested weakly. I saw him off last night. He loves me. Alice was like a sister to me. She wouldn't hurt me, she said, her voice trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes. Oh, James, are you sure? She asked, her voice breaking. I grimly showed her the video from the green room. As she watched, her face crumpled and she began to cry. I sat next to her, gently rubbing her back. I know, Betty. I know, I said softly, trying to comfort her. Suddenly she looked up, anger flashing in her eyes. That woman seduced him. If you had kept her under control. She stopped abruptly when she saw my shocked expression. Oh, James, I'm sorry. You lost your wife too, didn't you? Her words reopened my wounds and I began to cry as well. We hugged, finding solace in each other's misery. Finally, we pulled away and she wiped her tears. What are you going to do now? I explained the dire situation Alice had put me in, especially regarding Karen. Betty, who had no children, immediately grasped the severity and held my hand sympathetically. Oh, James, I never imagined she could be so cruel. What are you going to do? I'm going to file for divorce, but I need to make sure I don't lose Karen. It's better if you don't know the details, just in case. You're not planning anything illegal, are you? She asked, alarmed. No, but if I succeed, both she and Bob will regret this, I said, trying to muster a reassuring smile but likely failing. "And you? Can you rebuild your life after this?" she asked. "After finding out how long this has been going on and knowing they're spending a week together, I can't stay with him. Maybe you should use my lawyer unless you have someone else in mind," I suggested. She gave a weak smile. "I don't know any lawyers. If you use mine, it could save you money since he already has my evidence." I handed her my lawyer's contact information. "Call him on Monday and let him know we're on the same page." She nodded and took the paper. "Betty, I need a huge favor," I said. "What is it?" she asked nervously. "Please don't tell anyone about this until you hear from me. It could jeopardize my chances of keeping Karen." She looked at me solemnly and nodded. "I won't say a word, James. I promise." I thanked her and stood to leave. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "I'm going to pick up my daughter and take her out of town until this settles down." She wished me luck, and I did the same. We're both going to need it, I thought. I drove to Mrs. Morgan's house. When I arrived, Karen met me at the door and jumped into my arms. "Did you have a good time, honey?" I asked. "Oh, yes, Daddy. I had a sleepover and we had pancakes for breakfast and I played with dolls," she exclaimed, her excitement infectious. I thanked Mrs. Morgan and reminded her Karen wouldn't be coming next week. She looked at me shrewdly and asked, "Is everything all right, James?" "I hope so," I replied. She kissed Karen's cheek and said, "Take good care of her. She's like family to me. I'll be praying for you." "Thank you, Mrs. Morgan. It means a lot." I carried Karen to the car and buckled her in. When we got home, Karen asked, "Where's Mommy?" "Mom had to go on a trip, but you and I are going on a trip too," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Where are we going, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "To Grandma and Grandpa's farm," I replied. She squealed with delight and started dancing. Karen loved visiting my parents and seeing the farm animals. "Can we see the ducks and the little pigs?" she asked. "Sure, honey," I told her. "Let's get started." I grabbed our bags and we headed to the car. I considered leaving Alice a note, but decided against it. The drive to my parents' farm took a little over an hour. Karen slept most of the way, her small body finally at peace. As we turned onto the familiar gravel road, Karen woke up and pointed excitedly at the horses and cows. When we arrived, Mom and Dad greeted us warmly. Karen immediately rushed into Grandma's arms, eager to see the animals. Mom took her to the barn, giving me a concerned, questioning look as they walked away. I grabbed my bag while Dad took Karen's, and we went inside. Dad offered me a glass of fruit tea in the kitchen, its flavor instantly bringing back childhood memories. "Okay, James, what's going on with you and Alice?" Dad asked bluntly, worry etched into his eyes. "Let's take a walk, Dad, and I'll tell you everything," I suggested, knowing this conversation was inevitable, since I called asking if we could stay for a week. They loved Alice, and had always considered her the daughter they never had. I knew the truth would hit them hard. As we walked along the fence line, I recounted the entire story. Dad remained mostly silent, but I saw the pain in his eyes. He gasped at some parts, and by the end, tears were streaming down his face. "I can't believe Alice could do this. She's always been so good to us, and such a wonderful mother to Karen. How could she become so callous and selfish?" he asked, looking at me carefully. "James, could this be some kind of misunderstanding or a joke?" I understood his denial. I still struggled to believe it myself. I pulled out my phone and showed him the video from the green room. "Watch this, Dad," I said, pressing play. He muttered to himself as the video started. "I can't believe this. Oh my God." His voice trailed off as he saw Alice's nearly undressed body entangled with Bob Anderson. Dad stood there, shoulders slumped, his face tense. Then he grabbed me in a tight hug. "Oh, son, I'm so sorry. It hurts me so much to see this. I can't imagine how you felt," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. We stood there for a few more minutes, then walked back to the house in silence, his hand resting on my shoulder. "Dad, can you tell Mom I don't think I can?" I asked, my voice breaking. He nodded solemnly. "I'll do it," he said quietly. When we returned, Mom and Karen were in the kitchen having a snack. Mom looked worried as she saw Dad's expression. "Why don't you take Karen to the pond to see the ducklings?" he suggested gently. Karen jumped up, tugging my arm. "Let's go see the ducks, Daddy," she exclaimed eagerly. I nodded gratefully to Dad and led Karen to the pond. When we got back, Mom had been crying. She hugged me tightly. I love you, James. Dad and I will be here for you no matter what happens, she said, her voice trembling. Thanks, Mom, I whispered. Thank you, Dad. It means a lot, I added, looking at them both. We stood together in an emotional silence, unsettling Karen. Okay, Karen, let's go unpack and get ready for dinner, I said, taking her hand and leading her to our room. As I unpacked, I silently vowed that I would never lose my daughter, no matter what. The next day, we went to the old Baptist church that Mom and Dad had attended for years. The familiar hymns and comforting words provided a brief respite from my troubles. That evening, Joe called to update me on his weekend's work. I realized how lucky I was to have him as a friend and how much I owed him. When I tried to thank him, he brushed it off. You would have done the same for me, he said dismissively, understanding what I wanted to say. Then his tone changed. Okay, James, are you ready to put our plan into action? There's no turning back once we start, he warned. I paused to consider the risks. Even if we succeeded, things could still end badly. But Alice had humiliated me and put me in an unbearable position. I had to fight back. Joe, I said, let's do it. Joe must have sensed my resolve. If anything, Edie thinks you're doing the right thing, he said, cheering me up. Do you have access to a computer? I laughed. Yes, Joe, we're not living in the 1800s, I replied. Good. I'll call you tomorrow with more info, he said. Why not just email me the link? I asked, puzzled. No, I want to keep this private. Just wait for my call, he insisted. That night, I checked on Karen, ensuring she was asleep in her new bed. The next morning, Joe called with instructions. When you get some privacy, go to YouTube and type Wexy into the search bar. Watch it and tell me what you think. Mom and Dad had taken Karen out for a walk, so the timing was perfect. I went to YouTube and searched. A video titled, WXY co-host Alice Johnson shares her personal philosophy on love and marriage caught my eye. The familiar theme music for the 6 o'clock news played, but as the camera zoomed in on Alice, her voice faded and a voiceover began. Popular news co-host Alice Johnson of WXY was recently interviewed about her views on love and marriage, the voiceover announced. The screen switched to Alice saying, Marriage is an institution that has been around as long as human society, but today, it is under siege like never before. I recognized those lines from a series WXY had aired about the rising divorce rate, but instead of continuing, the voiceover returned. What are your views on the sanctity of marriage, Alice? The scene shifted to our den where Alice spoke. Wedding vows were written for another time. No one believes that nonsense anymore, she said. The scene froze, and the voiceover continued. What about fidelity to your husband? The voiceover asked. Alice replied, If I want to leave and hook up with Bob Anderson, I'll do it. That's what I want. Bob Anderson's image appeared, leaving no doubt about who she meant. The voiceover resumed. What about the public's opinion? Do you think your viewers would agree? Alice answered, I don't care what my fans think. They're just redneck dorks. In 6 months to a year, I'll leave this town for a real city. What people here think means nothing to me. The unseen voice asked, So you plan to have an affair with Bob Anderson? Alice's response was clear. I've already told you I'm going to have my affair with Bob, and there's nothing you can do. The video switched to footage I had shot in the green room. Alice nearly undressed with Bob. The stage froze on an intimate scene, and the voiceover concluded. Now Birmingham viewers are left with one question. Where are Alice and Bob this week? The WXY news theme played, showing an empty newsroom before fading out. I leaned back, feeling a complex mix of triumph and sadness. I called Joe, who answered immediately. What do you think? My God, Joe, you're a genius. This will destroy her career, I said, astonished. Pretty impressive, huh? I'm quite proud of it, he replied, chuckling. A twinge of guilt surfaced. Are we being too harsh on her? I wondered aloud. Did she really say all those things? Joe asked pointedly. Yes, but... No buts, James. She turned into a selfish monster, and people need to see that. You're a good guy, James. If you don't do this, Karen will be the one to suffer. Do you really want Alice as her role model? He said firmly. You're right, Joe. There's no other choice, I admitted. So what's next? Do we send out mass emails with the video link? No need. This will spread like wildfire. I'll tip off a few key people and it will go viral. Just be patient, he assured me. Okay, Joe, keep me in the loop, I said, feeling a bit more at ease. Over the next few days, Karen and I enjoyed our time at the farm. Karen learned about farming and cooking with my mom, experiencing things she wouldn't in the city. Meanwhile, Joe called daily with updates. On Tuesday, he laughed as he told me that Edie had heard about the video from a coworker. By Wednesday, it was the talk of the Kiwanis meeting, and on Thursday, a media columnist mentioned it in the paper, concluding with, "And the question on everyone's mind, where are Alice and Bob?" Joe was ecstatic when he called me Thursday afternoon. "I spoke with our media officer who handles WBXW," Joe said. "The entire station is in a frenzy. They're getting calls from other news outlets trying to interview Alice and Bob about the video, and the WXY staff is in chaos. Mike Ramirez is out of town and unreachable." On Friday, Joe directed me to a media blog article on Gawker.com. It reported on the uproar caused by the WXY anchors and linked to the YouTube video, predicting that heads might roll. That morning, I called my attorney to file for divorce and arranged for Alice to be served on Saturday at the country house in Gulf Shores, where she and Bob were staying. It was worth the extra expense. I also called Betty to let her know and asked if she wanted Bob served at the same time. "No," she replied. "I'll handle it myself when he gets home." I wished her luck. Other local TV stations in Birmingham, eager to capitalize on WXY's scandal, saw the video and jumped on the story. Joe tipped off a producer at the second highest-rated channel that I was filing for divorce, making it a legitimate news event. My attorney confirmed the filing and revealed the location where Alice would be served. The station decided to go all out, sending a video crew and lead reporter to Gulf Shores on Saturday. Joe called me Saturday morning with more news. Mike Ramirez cut his vacation short and is rushing back to Birmingham. "The WXY staff is terrified," Joe advised. "Make sure to watch the evening news on a competitor station tonight." Saturday, typically a slow news day, had the Alice and Bob story as the top headline. The broadcast opened with a picture of Alice and Bob, showing a billboard from my office window. Many Birmingham residents have been concerned about the whereabouts of Alice Johnson and Bob Anderson of WXY. "We found them in Gulf Shores." The footage then cut to reporter Hilda O'Reilly striding down the beach towards Alice and Bob, who were sunbathing. Neither noticed until Hilda began shouting, "Alice Johnson, Bob Anderson, what can you tell us about your relationship and the rumors circulating in Birmingham?" Alice, caught off guard and topless, scrambled to cover herself, while Bob awkwardly tried to hide his Speedo with a towel. "What do you have to say about the video circulating online?" Hilda asked sharply. "What video?" Alice stammered, visibly confused. "The one where you called Birmingham residents rednecks and discussed your affair with Bob Anderson," Hilda replied icily. Alice stuttered, and Bob attempted to intervene, but a man in a suit suddenly appeared. "Are you Alice Carter Johnson?" he asked. "Yes," she replied instinctively. "Then Miss Johnson," he said, handing her an envelope, "you have been served. Your husband also wants you to know that the locks on your house have been changed, and you are no longer welcome there." The man walked away, leaving Alice frozen in shock. Anger flared in her eyes as she screamed, "That son of a—" Bob, noticing the camera still rolling, quickly grabbed her and steered her toward the resort. The camera lingered on her retreating, oil-slicked figure as she stormed off. The local news anchor reappeared on the screen. Alice Johnson and Bob Anderson, missing all week, were discovered sharing a room at a luxury Gulf Shores resort. Alice's husband has filed for divorce and changed the locks on their house. Attempts to contact him have been unsuccessful. They couldn't reach me because Karen and I were at my parents' farm. Joe informed me that Alice didn't believe the bluff about the locks being changed and went to the house with Bob, only to find her key didn't work. A camera crew captured her frustration when they went to Bob's house. Betty served him divorce papers at the door, also caught on camera. They ended up spending the night in a motel. Joe got more details from our media manager, who had contacts at WXY. Mike Ramirez had returned to Birmingham and was furiously trying to contact Alice and Bob, who had their phones off. Mike was livid, especially after seeing the competing network's exclusive report. Bob finally called the office Sunday afternoon, and Mike ordered them to the studio. They sneaked in through the service elevator to avoid the competing station's van. Mike tore into them for their conduct and then fired them in front of the entire staff. "You can't do that! We have a contract!" Alice screamed. "Your contracts have a morals clause that requires you to act according to societal norms," Mike replied coldly. "What we do in private is nobody's business," Alice shot back. Mike, a devout Catholic, stood up. The priest spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the sin of infidelity at Mass this morning. He didn't mention you by name, but he did talk about public figures setting a poor example. Alice flinched, but Bob remained defiant. Nobody cares about us, he said dismissively. Clearly you missed the news last night, Mike replied sarcastically. Just look out the window. He pulled back the curtain, revealing a vandalized billboard that now read, Birmingham's choice for the 6 o'clock news is a strumpet. Alice gasped. Mike continued, Your behavior has disgraced the station and damaged our ratings and reputation. I have no choice but to take you off the air and terminate your contracts, Mike declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. Have you ever seen the original Frankenstein? Confused, Alice and Bob nodded. Well, you two are the monsters, and the people of Birmingham are the villagers with pitchforks. If I were you, I'd leave town as soon as possible. As I drove back to Birmingham on Sunday evening, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I waited until late to avoid any run-ins with Alice or the media. Along the way, I heard the news about Alice and Bob's dismissal over the radio. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the media circus had already moved on to a new scandal involving a local politician accused of embezzlement, relegating Bob and Alice's drama to the back pages. No one seemed interested in my reaction anymore. The next morning, I took Karen to Mrs. Morgan's house. She greeted us warmly, and Karen ran off to play. Mrs. Morgan gave me a sympathetic look. I was so sorry to hear about everything, James. I hope you and Karen are doing okay. I thanked her but admitted, I don't know how things will turn out. It was telling that she didn't mention Alice at all. At the office, my colleagues were polite but kept their distance, avoiding the topic of the scandal. Joe, however, greeted me with a tight hug. Joe, you're a genius, I told him. You orchestrated a masterstroke. It worked out better than we hoped, he said with a grin. The only downside is we'll never be able to tell anyone what we did. That's for the best, I replied. Alice will figure out I was behind it and come after me. I don't want you caught in the crossfire. To my surprise, my lawyer called at the end of the week with unexpected news. Alice has decided not to contest the divorce, he said. But why? I asked. She said she'd fight me tooth and nail. Her attorney advised her against it, he explained. She wanted to countersue for invasion of privacy, but the legal issues were too complex, and she's not popular right now. No sympathetic jurors. As for Karen, Alice is unemployed and has no prospects. No judge would give her custody. She's leaving town and relinquishing custody to you. She only wants to gather her belongings before she leaves and to have a final talk with you. If she signs the papers, I'll talk to her before she leaves, I agreed. We scheduled the meeting for the end of the week. I got almost everything I wanted, but it didn't feel like a victory. What I really wanted was my old life back, but that was impossible. At least I had Karen, and that was what mattered most. The next night, Joe, Edie, and I celebrated over dinner. Karen came along and slept in one of their beds while we talked. I brought champagne to toast my friends. Edie raised her glass. To us, she said. I thought your plan was crazy and would backfire, but you, she saluted me, fought for your daughter. And you, she turned to Joe, my wonderful husband, stood by him. Thank you both for fighting and winning despite the odds. Cheers, Joe and I echoed. Before wrapping up everything, I felt the need to check on Betty Anderson. She was an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire, suffering perhaps more than anyone else. I felt guilty for involving her, even though it was necessary, and Bob was the real culprit. Unlike me, Betty hadn't seen this coming. I called her and she invited me to lunch, indicating she didn't hold a grudge. We met at a quiet restaurant. After we ordered, I asked how she was doing. Not well, James, she said. One day I'm happily married to a TV host. The next I'm divorcing a liar who humiliated me. I know, Betty. This feels like a bad soap opera, I sympathized. She asked about my situation with Alice, and I shared the divorce results. Good, she said vindictively. She got what she deserved. What about Bob? I asked. That coward left town without facing me. He told his lawyer to give me whatever I wanted. I don't know where he is, and I don't care, except I keep waking up reaching for him, she said, tears welling up. Are you okay financially? I asked. Yes and no. He left me the house, but it's too big with a big mortgage. Bob has to pay alimony, but I don't count on it. Finding a new job for him won't be easy. I think I'll move in with my parents, find a job, and rebuild my life. This isn't how I imagined things, she said sadly. I felt terrible for her. She was a kind person who didn't deserve this. I asked her to stay in touch and let me know where she was. I really liked Betty and hoped she could pull through. The final hurdle was Alice's visit, which I dreaded. My earlier anger had subsided with the success of our viral video. Feeling I had regained some dignity, I no longer wanted to fight with Alice or gloat. I decided to do something kind by having Karen there when she arrived. When Alice pulled up in the SUV she rented to gather her belongings, she looked weary, but her expression softened when Karen ran to her. The frown disappeared, replaced by a smile and tears, as Karen hugged her tightly. Alice looked up at me and whispered, "Thank you." They played together for a long time. The visit was supposed to last an hour, but I extended it for Karen's sake. After Karen had shown and told her mother everything, Alice suggested she go to her room to play. "I'll be up soon, baby. Daddy and I need to talk first." Once Karen left, Alice turned to me, her tone sharp. "Thank you for that. I didn't expect you to let me see her." I just nodded. Alice's mood shifted. "You used a private conversation to destroy me and make me a laughingstock. How could you do that?" I sighed. "Alice, I don't want to fight anymore. Neither of us will win." "Easy for you to say," she snapped. "You cost me my job, my family, my future, just to protect your ego." "Alice," I said, trying to remain calm. "I wasn't going to fight, but think about it. None of this would have happened if you hadn't acted on your desires without regard for anyone else. You brought this on yourself." Alice started to reply, but Karen called out, asking when she'd come upstairs. Alice looked at me, then went upstairs to Karen. After playing in Karen's room, Alice packed her things while talking to her. I heard their happy chatter from downstairs. Finally, Alice came back down with her suitcases, Karen trailing behind. Alice knelt in front of Karen and said, "Mom has to leave. I'll be living in another state and won't see you every day, but I'll visit whenever I can. We can talk on the phone and video call as much as you want." Karen immediately cried out, "No, Mommy, I don't want you to go." She clung to her mother as if her life depended on it. Alice lifted her, hugging tightly and trying to soothe her. "It's okay, doll. I'll see you soon and we'll have a great time." Alice approached me, holding Karen tightly. "Now be a good girl for Daddy. I love you, Karen. Mike never forget that," she whispered, her voice trembling. With tears streaming down her face, she picked up her suitcases and walked briskly to the door, not once looking back. She loaded her belongings into the car, gave a quick wave, and drove away. I held my sobbing daughter, tears flowing down my own cheeks. We had both lost something irreplaceable that day. After a few moments, I gently put Karen down. "Hey, how about we go to the park to see the ducks and maybe get some ice cream? Would you like that?" Her tear-streaked face lit up slightly. "Oh, yes, and we can feed the cones to the ducks, can't we, Daddy?" "Of course we can," I replied, relieved to have found a way to distract her from the immediate pain. I hoped her young heart could heal quickly, and that I could adapt to this new reality as well. The following week brought even more challenges. Late one night, my boss called me into his office. "James, you've done a fantastic job here, and we truly value your contributions," he began, his tone indicating a caveat. I braced myself for the inevitable, but this situation with your wife is affecting our clients. They keep asking if you're Alice's husband, and it's impacting their confidence in us. Our relationship with WXY is also strained, and they're a critical media outlet for us." "Are you firing me?" I asked bluntly. "Not exactly," he said, his voice softening, "but we think it's best if you seek employment elsewhere." "How much time do I have?" I asked, my voice edged with frustration. "Take as much time as you need. I'll provide you with a glowing letter of recommendation." It wasn't fair, but there was no point in burning bridges. I shook his hand, assured him I understood, and thanked him for the recommendation. Then I went to Joe's office. "What's up, buddy?" he asked, noticing my expression. "I just got fired," I told him. "They think it's best for me to leave." "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed. "I'm going to give them a piece of my mind." I placed a hand on his shoulder, guiding him back to his chair. "No, Joe. You've done enough for me already. I knew it was risky when I started this." He wasn't happy, but eventually calmed down. We ended the conversation with a promise that I'd come over for dinner on Saturday, bringing Karen along. I returned to my office and began updating my resume, realizing that Alice and Bob's scandal had tainted my reputation in Birmingham. Everyone liked me, but no one wanted to hire me. It was time to broaden my search. Eventually, I reconnected with my old agency in Mobile, where the scandal hadn't reached, and they welcomed me back, appreciating my big city experience. I had to sell my house in Birmingham, and although the market was decent, I got little from the sale, which had to be split with Alice. Alice didn't vanish from our lives. She began calling Karen weekly, soon moving to Skype so they could see each other face to face. In-person meetings were impossible since Alice now lived in Santa Ana, California. Our viral video had more impact than expected, making her job search difficult even outside the Southeast. Eventually, she secured a teaching position in journalism at Santa Ana College. When I rejoined my old agency, I needed to find a place to live. The agency connected me with a real estate agent, Diana Thompson, who turned out to be Betty Anderson. She showed me several properties, and we caught up on everything that had happened. Betty had relocated to Mobile shortly after Bob left and had started a career in residential real estate. When I mentioned needing a preschool for Karen, Betty got excited and offered to help with that and other children's activities. I enjoyed our conversations and invited her to dinner to discuss the houses further. Betty was always pretty, like the girl next door, and I found her natural and easy to talk to, unlike the TV personalities I was used to. She recommended a modestly priced house, which surprised me. When I asked why, she said it was the kind of place she would like to live. Her honesty endeared her to me. Betty and I eventually got married and moved into the house she liked. I had been worried about how Karen and Betty would get along, but my fears were unfounded. Betty had always wanted a family, a desire that Bob had dismissed, believing a child would hinder his career. She and Karen bonded instantly, and Karen soon started calling her Betty Mom, which quickly became just Mom. That summer, we flew to Los Angeles so Karen could visit Alice. Betty and I planned to explore LA while Karen stayed with her mom for a week. I was hesitant to bring this up with Betty, considering her reasons to dislike Alice, but she thought it was a great idea. She seemed more confident in our marriage and more mature about the situation than I had anticipated. We arrived at John Wayne Airport, where Alice was waiting for us. Despite seeing her often on Skype, I almost didn't recognize her with her short haircut and business casual attire. Karen suddenly became shy, clinging to Betty's waist and hiding her face. Betty gently nudged her toward Alice, whispering encouragement. Eventually, Karen walked hesitantly to Alice, then ran and hugged her. Alice cried with happiness, which initially confused and worried Karen. "I'm just so happy to see you," Alice reassured her, hugging her tightly. Alice looked at Betty and me and whispered, "Thank you." The four of us went to the baggage claim area. When Karen paused to admire items in a store window, Alice turned to us. "I know we don't have much time, but I want to apologize. I've done a lot of thinking and therapy over the past couple of years. I realized what I had become in my pursuit of stardom and how much I hurt those around me, especially you two. You probably can't forgive me, but I hope you won't hate me." Betty and I exchanged a glance, then hugged Alice together, releasing a lot of past hurt. After our vacation, I called Birmingham one evening. Edie answered, and we chatted before I asked to speak to Joe. When he got on the line, I made my pitch. "You took a chance on me once. Will you do it again?" I asked, feeling a surge of hope. "What are you talking about, James?" he replied, sounding puzzled. "Quit your job, move here, and start an advertising agency called Carter and Miller. What do you say?" I proposed, holding my breath. Joe replied, "Only if we call it Miller and Carter." We laughed and started planning. Joe wasn't happy at his old job and was eager for something new, so my call came at the perfect time. We moved Joe and Edie to Mobile, with Betty helping them find a beautiful home nearby, even refusing a commission to make it easier for them. Shortly after opening our agency, we pitched to a potential client who loved our approach. "I want to stand out. Can you guys do something like a viral campaign?" he asked, looking intrigued. Joe and I smiled at each other. "Absolutely," I said, confidence growing. "We can handle it."